Hello and welcome. I'm James Ezimoha and you're watching A News. Let's see your headlines. U.S. President Donald Trump says he is hopeful the Strait of Hormuz will open very soon as mediators work to secure a deal. EU backs tighter border controls after deadly Ceuta crossings. And Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan begin agreed borderland exchange. Iran says talks with Oman on reopening the Strait of Hormuz are advancing as Donald Trump voices optimism but warns of severe consequences if diplomacy fails.
Iran says negotiations with Oman on reopening the Strait of Hormuz are making progress, raising hopes of easing tensions and restoring traffic through the key energy route. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghaei says the talks are focused on establishing safe shipping routes while protecting the interests of both countries. Regional officials say the proposed arrangement would allow ships to enter the Persian Gulf through an Iranian-controlled route and exit through one managed by Oman, though no final agreement has been reached. Over in the US, officials also expressed optimism. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says a breakthrough could come soon, adding that reopening of the waterway would restore freedom of navigation and help stabilize global energy markets. President Donald Trump says the talks have gone well but warns Iran of severe consequences if negotiations fail.
We're having very good discussions. They don't like to admit that, but it's a little bit disconcerting. You tell people like you, we're having wonderful discussions, and then some guy will come out of Iran and say, we have not met, we have not, it's just such a lie. All day long, you understand, it's just incredible.
However, Iran denies direct talks with Washington, saying negotiations are only with Oman. Qatar says it's working alongside Oman and Pakistan to support mediation efforts. Meanwhile, U.S. Central Command says 451 commercial vessels have been redirected under the blockade of Iran since mid-July. Separately, the U.S. says it's used a significant share of its long-range precision missiles during the Iran war, though officials say military capabilities remain intact. The Strait of Hormuz normally carries around 1/5 of global oil and gas shipments, making any agreement to reopen the waterway significant for energy markets.
And there are growing signs those negotiations may now be nearing a breakthrough. Iran and Oman are expected to announce a Strait of Hormuz agreement later on Wednesday, following progress at technical and political levels. Turaj Shivelilu has the latest from Iran's capital.
Iran's foreign ministry spokesman Esmail Baghaei has said that Tehran has a positive assessment of its discussions with Omani officials about the Strait of Hormuz, both at technical and political levels. He made this statement on the state-owned IRIB TV, adding that negotiations between the two countries on either side of the strategic waterway focus on designating safe routes for the passage of vessels. Amid reports that Tehran and Muscat are close to agree on a 30-day memorandum of understanding, Baghaei said that the outcome of the talks will be announced after they are finalized, without providing a date. A News has learned from a reliable source that the Iran-Oman deal is expected to be announced later on Wednesday. In a related development, an official source was quoted as saying that an agreement is within reach between Iran and Oman. Press TV, affiliated with the state broadcaster IRIB, said the two sides have entered a new phase in talks over safe shipping corridors through the strait, despite what it called U.S. obstructions. Meanwhile, the clock is ticking, as Tehran and Washington have less than 2 weeks until the expiry of the 60-day ceasefire memorandum of understanding signed by the Iranian and U.S. presidents on 17th June. The 14-point agreement, mediated by Pakistan, was meant to serve as a prelude to a lasting peace, but it hit a major obstacle, particularly over the interpretation of Clause 5 on reopening the Strait of Hormuz. Turaj Shivelilu from Tehran for A News.
And the prospect of a breakthrough is already rippling through global markets. Brent and U.S. crude fell more than 5% on Tuesday, reversing earlier gains as hopes rose for a diplomatic agreement.
Global oil prices fell sharply to their lowest levels in 3 weeks after renewed optimism over a potential diplomatic agreement between the United States and Iran. Brent crude and U.S. West Texas Intermediate both dropped by around 4% during Tuesday's trading, reversing earlier gains of more than 2% driven by uncertainty over the negotiations. By the market close, WTI had fallen 5.69% to settle at $75.77 a barrel, while Brent showed 5.26% fall to $79.36. The decline followed comments from Qatar and the United States indicating that negotiations to reopen the strategically vital waterway were making progress. Qatar's foreign ministry said mediators, including Qatar, Oman, and Pakistan, were continuing efforts to broker a diplomatic solution. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said an agreement could be reached within days and noted that ships had already begun exiting the strait.
Still staying in the Middle East, we turn our attention now to Gaza. Israel is tying any further troop withdrawal from Gaza to the full disarmament of Hamas. Benjamin Netanyahu says forces will remain in their current positions until that happens. Israel's prime minister pushed back against a recent ceasefire proposal backed by U.S. President Donald Trump, saying the plan was not accepted by Israel and that his government had submitted its own changes. The proposed agreement called for Hamas to begin disarming, while Israel would halt attacks and start withdrawing from parts of the Strip. And the impact of the conflict across the Middle East is also being felt far beyond the region. Anti-Semitism in Britain remains close to record levels, with nearly 2,000 incidents reported in the first half of this year. The Community Security Trust says it is the second highest total ever recorded for that period. Zainab Farizada has more.
Anti-Semitism in Britain remains close to record levels, according to a new report from the Community Security Trust, a charity that advises Jewish communities on security. The organization recorded almost 2,000 anti-Semitic incidents in the first 6 months of this year, making it the second highest total ever reported for the first half of any year. Among the most serious cases was the stabbing of 2 Jewish worshippers in North London in April. Police are treating the incident as an act of terrorism. The report also highlights a series of arson attacks targeting Jewish sites in London, including the destruction of 4 ambulances belonging to a Jewish volunteer emergency service. The report says incidents increased sharply following the outbreak of the US and Israeli war with Iran earlier this year. British authorities have since accused Iran of using proxy groups to carry out attacks in Britain and across Europe. Iran has repeatedly denied those allegations. The charity's chief executive says the attacks reflect a range of threats facing Britain, including those linked to Iran, as well as Islamist, far-right and far-left extremists. Earlier this month, the UK government announced £250 million over the next 3 years to strengthen security at Jewish schools, synagogues and community centres. The policing minister, Sarah Jones, says anti-Semitism goes against Britain's values and that the government will do everything in its power to protect Jewish communities. Zainab Farizada, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Now, foreign ministers from Arab and Muslim countries met in Jordan's capital, Amman, to discuss the protection of holy sites in Jerusalem. The talks brought together ministers from Jordan, Indonesia, Pakistan, Turkey, and Malaysia. During the meeting, Jordanian Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi urged the international community to act decisively to stop what he called Israeli violations in Jerusalem and its holy sites. In a joint statement, participants condemned what they described as Israeli efforts to alter the Arab, Islamic, and Christian identity as well as the legal and demographic status of Jerusalem. Now, away from diplomacy, extreme weather is tightening its grip on Europe. A severe heat wave is sweeping across parts of the continent. Several countries have issued their highest weather alerts as temperatures remain exceptionally high. Italy has placed all 27 of its major cities under red heat alerts for the first time this year. Hungary has extended its nationwide highest level warning until Friday as drought conditions worsen and river levels fall. In Austria, Vienna recorded a new temperature record of 41 degrees Celsius, while wildfires continue to burn in the east. Swiss weather officials say this year's heat wave is comparable to the record-breaking conditions of 2003. They also warned that 2026 is likely to rank among the hottest years on record. And the consequences are now spreading far beyond the thermometer. Severe drought and successive heat waves are pushing major European rivers towards record lows. Falling water levels are disrupting transport and sharply reducing output at nuclear plants in Hungary and Romania.
A severe drought and successive heat waves are pushing major European rivers towards record lows, exposing long-hidden landmarks and threatening water, transport and energy supplies. In Poland, temperatures are approaching 40 degrees Celsius in the south. Sandbanks have emerged along the Vistula, while the San River has fallen to an historic reduced level. Drought alerts are in place nationwide.
The south part of Poland is very dry. We have 71 alerts, dry alerts in all Poland, and it's 320 stations, water stations, when we have the really low flow on the rivers. Even in 30 stations, water stations, we have the lowest ever level of the river.
Over in Germany, the shrinking Rhine has revealed a sunken fishing boat last seen in 2022, along with so-called hunger stones. The historic markers, including some dated 1857 and 1947, warn future generations of drought and possible famine. Further downstream in the Danube, sandbanks and an old bridge wreckage in Budapest have been exposed. Hungary's Pax nuclear plant, which normally supplies about half the country's electricity, is operating at around 10% capacity because of a lack of water for cooling. On Monday, the Prime Minister said the weather will change by Friday.
There are a few critical days left. Today and tomorrow are certainly that. I ask everyone to continue the national unity that has developed in the country. Let's do what our country demands. And it's good to see that there's already light at the end of the tunnel, because the meteorology predicts a cold front for Friday, and the temperature will drop significantly. Until then, however, there will be very hot days.
In Romania, authorities used controlled explosions on Monday to divert water from the Danube River, using rocks as a temporary barrier, towards the Cernavodă nuclear plant. One of its 2 reactors has already been shut down, reducing output from a facility that normally supplies around 1/5 of Romania's electricity.
Now, staying in Europe, the French authorities have detained more than 400 people, including 156 minors, over suspected links to the wildfires since the start of summer. Around 14,000 separate fires have been recorded across the country this summer, according to the French Interior Ministry. The figure includes both deliberate and accidental blazes. In the southern Var department, firefighters are continuing to battle a blaze that has been burning for 2 weeks. 16 regions remain on alert for more extreme weather, with high temperatures forecast until at least Friday. In Brussels, another crisis is testing Europe's collective response. EU members have broadly backed stronger external border controls after more than 70,000 people entered Spain's Ceuta territory from Morocco. At least 75 people died during the crossings, prompting criticism of Madrid and calls for its suspension from the Schengen zone. William Denslow reports from Brussels.
The initial developments in Ceuta, with thousands of people crossing the border into the Spanish territory in North Africa, was met with fierce criticism from a number of EU member states. Italy threatening to suspend Spain from the free movement Schengen agreement. France also threatening to bolster its security along its borders with Spain as well. However, there has been praise subsequently on the announcement from Spanish authorities that roughly 70,000 of the 72,000 or so people that had crossed into Ceuta had returned to Morocco. Now, this comes as interior ministers from across the bloc gathered for an emergency meeting on Tuesday, where they had the opportunity to discuss a 5-point plan put forward by Ursula von der Leyen and the European Commission. Now, this included several proposals, including an early warning system to prevent situations like this transpiring in the future, better cooperation with non-EU countries, so like that of Morocco, also better targeting of smuggling operations, as well as reinforcing returns. This comes, as we've heard from Greece's Prime Minister, saying that what is needed from the EU is more tools to combat what he says is the weaponization of migration. Now, there has been plenty of criticism for Madrid when it comes to its regularization campaign, which essentially saw more than 1 million applicants as part of it, really trying to give temporary work status for people, undocumented migrants in Spain. Now, that has been met with criticism from a number of other members of the European Union, some describing it as a pull factor for irregular migration. We also heard from Magnus Brunner, the commissioner tasked with the issue of migration here at the European Commission. He said that it was not a good signal for Europe. This is expected to be among a number of topics on the issue of migration, set to be central when members of the European Parliament discuss this issue on Thursday. For A News, I'm William Denslow in Brussels.
Now, staying with the crossings, most of the migrants who crossed into Spain's North African enclave of Ceuta last week have now left. But for many families in neighboring Morocco, the search for missing loved ones continues.
At the border between Morocco and Spain, anxious parents are searching for any news of children who disappeared during last week's crossing to Ceuta. One of them is the mother of 23-year-old Haitham al-Haddad. She has not heard from her son since he left on the 30th of July. The only sign he had reached the Spanish city was a video circulating on Instagram.
I'm dying of fear. I cannot focus at home or at work, nothing. I had a mental breakdown. I have diabetes. He is my only son.
Mokhtar said he searched hospitals and a morgue in Tetuan, but still could not find his son, Mohammed. Not every family was left without news. Mohammed Raider said his teenage son and daughter called from Ceuta after receiving medical treatment, food and clothing, and have stayed in touch every day. Raider said his children decided to leave after seeing Instagram posts claiming Ceuta was open. The posts helped fuel the mass movement by spreading misinformation about migrants' chances of remaining in the territory and reaching Europe. Spanish authorities say most of those who crossed have now left the enclave and returned to Morocco. Interior Minister Fernando Grande Marlaska said around 70,000 of the roughly 72,000 migrants had departed by Tuesday. He also told European Union counterparts the provisional death toll from the border crisis had risen to 75.
Joining me now to discuss this is Ines Burrell, geopolitical analyst, joining us from Turkey, UK. Good to have you, ma'am.
Thank you for having me.
Now, the EU initially questioned Spain's handling of Ceuta, but is now back in Madrid. What changed inside Europe?
Nothing much really changed as far as I can see. This is all about politics. Don't forget that very soon there will be quite a few high-level elections in Europe. And whether we like it or not, but immigration is one of the major subjects that affects how electorate chooses their representatives. In most of Europe, people have got a bit tired of uncontrolled immigration. Especially it affects countries that have had this immigration for many, many years. There's also the fact that Eastern Europe, for example, has a completely different view of multiculturalism, and it is staunch supporter of national state. So the result is that with all the elections coming very soon, politicians have to at least pretend that they're doing something, which is why, to start with, there was criticism of Spain, and then they had to show that there is the European Union is all friendly and have the same aims. So now we're talking about how wonderfully everything was handled.
Now, ministers want stronger external borders across Europe. How much of this goes beyond the Ceuta crisis itself?
It is a very large issue, and unfortunately, it is not something that ministers or just, one parliament can solve. The problem is that the EU can make all sorts of laws, they can put funds into programs, but if there will be no countries who are willing to take their citizens back, there's nothing they can do. And just changing the laws is insufficient, and people are starting to see this, which is why we're going to see a lot of right-wing governments come to power all over Europe because of this one issue.
Mm-hmm. Now, speaking about the law, the EU is also strengthening its return system. Could Ceuta accelerate changes that were already underway?
Again, we're talking about what EU is doing. We're not talking about what the other side, the receiving side, is doing, whether it's interested in taking back its citizens. Obviously, people are fleeing because they want higher level of prosperity, which they're not offered in their own countries. Now, why is such a level of prosperity unattainable in those countries? Maybe countries like EU should think about helping people in their own countries before they have to flee to Europe. But the point is that at the moment, EU can only control what its own reaction and actions are to this crisis, but there is not much they can do to affect the other side unless they're willing to make some really serious sacrifices and also some very hard decisions.
Now, speaking about receiving countries, Morocco is central to Europe's border strategy. How much leverage does that give Rabat over the EU?
Quite a lot. As we can see, immigration can be weaponized, and this is what has been done. For whatever reason, Morocco chose to ignore the agreements they had with Spain, at least from the way we see how the border guards behave. They just wave the people through. And the weaponization of immigration is a very serious issue. So effectively, you can have countries that are being paid or influenced by other countries like China or Russia, who are sending migrant waves into EU, like it's routinely happening, for example, in the Baltic states, where Belarus is all the time trying to send migrants through via Latvia and Lithuania. So weaponization of immigration is a very serious issue, and that means that the countries who are on the border with the EU or thereabout, they have quite a lot of power, and they need to be dealt with accordingly.
Now, Spain says 70,000 people have already left Ceuta. Does that strengthen Madrid's case for tougher EU border policy?
Not necessarily. Yes and no. See, none of these people really could have crossed into Schengen zone. There is a small exception. There are the unaccompanied minors. And as far as I understand, there's quite a lot of them. Now, all the rules that apply to normal unregulated immigrants apply to adults. as to children, or those who claim to be children, because there are those as well, they don't fall within this scope, which means that they cannot be returned. They have to be looked after in a special way. After a certain amount of time, they have to be accommodated. And eventually, if they are legalized, they can bring in their extensive family members. So this is also a way to weaponize minor children, really. All of this creates a serious problem, and which Spain has so far not answered, especially in light of its Supreme Court ruling, which states that no illegal immigrants can be just returned without due course.
Now, the EU says smuggling networks and online disinformation helped drive the influx. How should Europe respond to that threat?
Well, there is a political way to respond to it, which is what it has been doing. Now, political method doesn't actually resolve the problem. So the question is, should it just postulate, as most countries do? Generally speaking, politicians do what's best for their re-election purposes, or they want to solve the problem. Now, if they just want to get re-elected, they'll just speak tough and nothing will be done. And this is probably what will happen. Those who would love to solve the problem would look at hard decisions that have to be made before even harder or bigger problems appear. For example, I know no likes to think about the ability to influence foreign states with foreign aid withdrawal. But that is something that countries will eventually have to think about to influence the third countries' desire to take back their citizens before some right-wing governments come to power and start pushing back people in the middle of the sea.
Thank you. That was Ines Burrell, geopolitical analyst, joining us from United Kingdom. Thank you for your time, man.
Thank you.
All right, after the break, we'll take a look at fresh Russian and Ukraine strikes with damage reported in Kyiv and Tula. Stay with us. Welcome back to WAY News. We continue with the Russia-Ukraine war. Kyiv has come under a fresh overnight Russian air attack, sparking fires and damaging warehouses, logistics centers, and a railway station. Russia also reported Ukrainian drone strikes on commercial and industrial sites in Tula region.
Russian forces launched an overnight air attack on the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, early on Wednesday, triggering fires and causing widespread damage. Ukrainian officials say air raid alerts remained in effect for more than an hour. Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko said a warehouse near the city centre was destroyed, with rescue teams pulling 2 people from the rubble. He added that the strike sparked blazes at warehouses and storage facilities, while earlier reports that a 20-story residential building was on fire were later found to be incorrect. The city's military administration also reported an ammonia leak caused by the strike. President Volodymyr Zelensky said the attack destroyed warehouses and logistics centers belonging to major retailers, as well as a railway station, a brewing company, and construction materials warehouses. Meanwhile, Russia said Ukraine carried out drone attacks on its territory on Wednesday. According to Tula Regional Governor Dmitry Milyayev, a logistics hub belonging to Russia's leading online retailer, Wildberries, was hit, injuring 1 person. The retail company said that staff were evacuated to safety and delivery operations had been redirected. Governor Milyayev also said 2 industrial facilities in the city of Novomoskovsk and the Yozlovaya district were damaged, along with 2 apartment buildings elsewhere in the Tula region. Russia's defense ministry said it had struck 7 logistics centers in and around Kyiv, alleging they were being used to store or distribute dual-use goods and drone components. Both Russia and Ukraine continue to exchange long-range drone and missile strikes with no immediate sign of a reduction in hostilities.
Ukrainian President Zelensky has condemned what he described as another deliberate Russian drone attack on a civilian in the southern city of Kherson. In a post on Telegram, Zelensky said a Russian drone targeted a man selling vegetables at a local market. before striking nearby. The vendor survived but was injured. The Ukrainian leader accused the Russian forces of deliberately hunting civilians and said such attacks have become a daily reality. The Ukrainian president called on the international community to increase pressure on Moscow. Russian President Vladimir Putin has appointed Denis Lyman to lead Russia's newly established Unmanned Systems Forces, a military branch dedicated to drone warfare. Announcing the move as part of a wider military restructuring, Putin described Lyman as one of Russia's most qualified specialists and tasked him with completing the formation of the new force. Lyman previously served as chief of staff of the center group of Russian forces fighting in Ukraine. Ukrainian military intelligence says a North Korean missile unit has begun deploying in western Russia and could be used in future strikes against Ukraine. Kyiv says the unit may include around 90 personnel, up to 120 ballistic missiles and 6 launchers based in Russia's Voronezh region. The deployment would deepen military ties between Moscow and Pyongyang. Ukraine warns that more ballistic missiles could put further pressure on its strained air defenses. Russia and North Korea have not commented on the claims. And one company repeatedly caught in those cross-border attacks is reshaping its wider logistics network. Wildberries is expanding its presence in Kazakhstan with 260,000 square meters of new warehouse capacity under construction. The facilities are due to open in early 2027 as the retailer reorganizes following repeated drone strikes inside Russia.
Wildberries is expanding further beyond Russia with 260,000 square meters of new warehouse capacity now under construction in Kazakhstan. Trade Minister Arman Shakaliev says the facilities are part of a long-term expansion project and are due to be commissioned in the first quarter of 2027. The investment comes as the retailer continues to reorganize its logistics network following repeated Ukrainian drone attacks on its facilities inside Russia. Officials say Ukrainian drones struck 3 warehouses this week, including 2 operated by Wildberries. One caught fire near St. Petersburg, another was damaged in the Tver region, while a separate strike on an unnamed warehouse in the Moscow region killed 5 people and injured 10 others. Ukraine says it initially targeted Wildberries because of what it described as the company's role in supplying the Russian military. Moscow denies these allegations, calling the attacks on the retailer's facilities as acts of terrorism. Wildberries says more than a dozen of its sites have been attacked since the 18th of July. Founder and chief executive Tatiana Kim says the company is redistributing goods across its logistics network and working with the Russian government on measures to support affected vendors.
Georgia's ruling party has accused NATO of misleading the country and Ukraine for years over the possibility of future membership in the security alliance. Tbilisi mayor and Georgian Dream Party Secretary General Kaya Kaladze said that both countries had repeatedly been told that NATO's doors were open, but alliance officials were now suggesting membership was unlikely. A Georgian parliamentary official said that if NATO rules out admitting Georgia, the country may need to pursue a broader foreign policy approach. All right, after the break, we'll take a look at renewed counter-terrorism cooperation between Pakistan and the United States. Stay with us. Welcome back to Way News. Now, Pakistan and the United States have reaffirmed their counter-terrorism partnership following high-level talks in Washington. Both sides agreed to strengthen border security and disrupt militant networks amid renewed attacks in Pakistan. Mariam Zia reports from Islamabad.
Senior officials from Pakistan and the United States met for the 4th bilateral counterterrorism dialogue in Washington on Tuesday, reaffirming their partnership. The talks were led by Pakistan's Special Secretary, Ambassador Nabil Munir, and US Coordinator for Counterterrorism, Ambassador Gregory Ligerfo. In a joint statement released on Wednesday, the two governments reaffirmed their resolve to confront Daesh Khorasan, Al-Qaeda, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan or TTP, and the Balochistan Liberation Army. Both countries also agreed to strengthen border security and disrupt terrorist facilitation networks. Pakistan's Foreign Office said they discussed regional and global terrorist threats and pledged to deepen counterterrorism cooperation both bilaterally and at multilateral forums. The dialogue comes as Pakistan faces a renewed wave of militant attacks, particularly in its northwestern Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and southwestern Balochistan provinces, with both countries seeking closer coordination against evolving transnational security threats. Mariam Zia, A News, Islamabad.
And Pakistan also renewing its diplomatic focus on Kashmir, 7 years after India revoked Jammu and Kashmir's special status. Pakistani diplomats say the move violated international law and remains a threat to regional stability. New Delhi rejects outside mediation and maintains that Kashmir is an integral part of India.
On August 5, 2019, the Indian government stripped Jammu and Kashmir of its special status by revoking Articles 370 and 35A of its constitution. The move divided the Muslim-majority region into two federally administered territories. Pakistani diplomats warn this was not just an administrative shift, but a calculated violation of international law.
7 years have passed since India's illegal and unilateral actions of 5th August 2019, which sought to alter the internationally recognized disputed status of Jammu and Kashmir in violation of international law and the relevant United Nations Security Council resolutions. These actions cannot change the legal status of the dispute, nor can they weaken the resolve of Kashmiri people.
Reading a special message on behalf of Pakistan's Prime Minister, officials called the dispute the main hurdle to regional stability, urging the international community to move from rhetoric to action.
The Jammu and Kashmir dispute is the most fundamental and long-standing unresolved issue for peace and stability in South Asia. Lasting peace in the region is not possible through the use of force or unilateral actions, but only through a just and peaceful resolution in accordance with the aspirations of the Kashmiri people and UN Security Council resolutions.
Diplomats drew stark parallels with Azerbaijan's history, praising Baku's principled stance against alleged demographic engineering and occupation.
These measures, as all of you and our brothers and sisters in Azerbaijan have also witnessed when Karabakh was under occupation, these domestic measures do not really change the international demands, international law resolutions and UNSC resolutions.
Islamabad continues to urge the global media to recognize the crisis not merely as a political territorial dispute, but as an urgent human rights emergency. Meanwhile, New Delhi consistently rejects third-party mediation, insisting that Kashmir remains an integral and internal part of India.
Now elsewhere in Asia, a long-running border issue is moving towards resolution. Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan have begun implementing a land exchange agreement to complete the demarcation of their shared border. Two Uzbek villages, home mainly to ethnic Kyrgyz residents, will transfer to Kyrgyz jurisdiction in return for an equivalent area of land. Farza Kalamoziner has more.
Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan have begun implementing a border agreement signed in November 2022, under which the two countries will exchange land as part of the final demarcation of their shared frontier. A joint commission has started work in Kyrgyzstan's Kadamjay district, where officials and technical experts will oversee the legal, administrative and logistical procedures for an agreed land exchange between the two countries. Under the agreement, the villages of Chongara and Tashtobo, previously part of Uzbekistan's Fergana region, will come under Kyrgyz jurisdiction. Around 2,500 people live in the two villages, most of them ethnic Kyrgyz. registration procedures are now underway, after which eligible residents will be able to obtain Kyrgyz citizenship. In return, Kyrgyzstan will transfer an equivalent area of land to Uzbekistan. Kyrgyz authorities say the exchange is part of the final demarcation of the bilateral border and is intended to resolve issues that have remained unsettled for decades. The agreement also includes plans for new infrastructure. 236-hectare land exchange, which is slightly more than 2.3 square kilometers, will allow the construction of a new route, which will improve transport links and significantly reducing travel times in the border region. Farisa Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
To help us unpack this development, we're joined now by Nubulat Nishambayev, professor at Turan University in Almaty, Kazakhstan. Good to have you, sir. Now, for decades, the Fergan Valley's borders created disputes and security risks. What made Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan ready to settle them now?
Yes, definitely we have seen some backlash over the last decades, but now Central Asian states coming into common vision to general ideas. So this is the signal how those states, they see and they are able to tackle their own issues without any external interruptions. So the case between Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan, it shows us so the new wave of leadership, how they see these issues. So these issues now, working not for the conflict, but for the common integration, for the common unity of Central Asian states. So therefore, Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan case, it's not end of the conflict, but it's a strategic turning point for stopping any misunderstandings over the territories in the future too. So therefore, Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan case, I would say this is kind of strategic, visionary from the both leaderships, the first things. The second thing is there are more reasons to come into the conclusion on this territory swap rather than not to do it. The first thing is, of course, ethnicities. So in the region of Uzbekistan still lives thousands of ethnic Kyrgyz and vice versa in Kyrgyzstan too. So therefore, those colonial periods during the Soviet Union's territorial making a line, so they didn't consider any ethnical aspects. They consider it from the economic perspective only. So therefore now, after 30 years, more than 30 years of independence, coming into single conclusion, swapping the border and signing at the international level and recognizing from other parts. So it shows us now Central Asian countries, finally they have come past a long way, but they have achieved common vision over the disputes.
All right. Now,
so therefore they are trying to prevent any tackles in the future regarding the borders.
All right, Professor. Now, 2 villages and about 2,500 residents have changed jurisdiction. How do you make a territorial change work for the people living there?
Well, this is the first thing. This kind of challenges, this kind of changes wouldn't be possible without the people's agreement, their dissent. So therefore, the first thing I consider, so local people, they have accepted this condition from both sides, because without their consent, this is impossible. The second thing is, if we look international, globally, examples as a cases, this is very rare. So what it says, over the last decades, among experts, we have witnessed how locals, they tried to go back to their own countries. But the land where they were born, it's their own. They feel like a home. But it belongs to the other republics. So therefore, I think after long discussion, after long diplomatic negotiation, finally the willingness of the local people over the 2,000 residents,
Yeah.
they were able to feel home again, their home countries.
All right.
So without their consent, all the aspects wouldn't be possible, in shortly.
Yeah, and like you said, this is very, very rare and quite fascinating as far as I'm concerned. Could this model of negotiated land exchanges offer Central Asia a way to resolve other difficult borders?
Exactly. Now, for example, the disputes in Middle East, all the disputes on Ukraine and Russia, all the wars, the lives of millions of soldiers and the billions of economic loss are taking place because of absence of such a kind of mindset or such a kind of diplomatic visions. So therefore, the case of Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan, it shows to the whole world, this is possible. This is not kind of losing in the war without going to the war or something bad, negative to the homeland, but instead it shows generosity and to see how is important strategically for their own states. So swapping the territories, this is a very important solution, and Central Asian solution, I don't think it will be applicable to the whole countries, but Central Asian uniqueness is 30 years ago, all the Central Asian countries we have lived under the same umbrella, so-called Soviet Union. So therefore, most of the territorial borders made from the Moscow. So now I think this approach works because we have seen common colonial process and we try to fix it up. So therefore, Central Asian approach will be applicable and works very well for those states who have experienced colonial past like Central Asian countries.
Thank you. That was Nubulat Nishambayev, professor at the Turan University, joining us from Almaty, Kazakhstan. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Now, staying in the region, security concerns are testing relations among another group of neighbors. Afghanistan denies that militant groups are operating from its territory or threatening neighboring countries. Kabul's response follows concerns raised by China and Pakistan over the alleged presence of militant groups. Tamim Bahis has more.
Afghanistan says it does not pose a threat to any neighboring country. That's the message from Kabul's chief spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid, who has firmly dismissed claims made by Chinese and Pakistani representatives that militant groups are operating from Afghan soil. Mujahid said Afghanistan is secure and its territory is not being used to launch attacks against other countries. He added that no unauthorized armed groups are operating inside the country. He said that any concerns or what he called propaganda about Afghanistan's security were the responsibility of those making the claims. The spokesperson also said that security challenges within other countries are their internal affairs and that Afghanistan should not be blamed. His comments followed talks between Chinese and Pakistani envoys who raised concerns about the TTP, the Pakistani Taliban, and ETIM, known as the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, allegedly operating from Afghan territory. Both countries agreed to strengthen counter-terrorism coordination and diplomatic engagement with Afghanistan. Despite these differing positions, China has continued to play a mediating role between Afghanistan and Pakistan, encouraging dialogue to reduce tensions and improve regional stability. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
And finally, a public dispute over Ruben Vardanian is drawing attention. Turkish-American engineer and writer Ergun Kirlikovali has challenged author Nassim Nicholas Taleb over his position on Vardanian's imprisonment. In an open letter, he urged Taleb to examine allegations surrounding Vardanian and give greater consideration to Azerbaijani victims of the Karabakh conflict.
Turkish-American engineer, researcher and writer Ergun Kirlikovali has criticized author Nassim Nicholas Taleb over his stance on Ruben Vardanian. In an open letter, Kirlikovali urged the Nobel Prize-winning author to reconsider his public position. The letter came after Taleb said on X that he would not lecture in Baku while Vardanian remains in prison. Kurlakovala said Taleb should apply the same critical analysis to Vardanyan's record that he applies to financial and political risks. He argued that Vardanyan's public image as a philanthropist should also be examined alongside allegations linked to his financial and political activities. Kurlakovala referred to investigations involving Troika Dialogue and the so-called Troika Laundromat, claiming the network was connected to offshore financial schemes. But who is Ergun Kurlakovala? The Turkish-born chemist and polymer scientist moved to the United States in 1978. He developed highly specialized coatings used in U.S. Navy and Air Force programs. His work included advanced materials associated with the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber and the F-35 fighter jet. Kurlakovala also said more attention should be paid to the suffering of Azerbaijani civilians during the Karabakh conflict. He referred to the displacement of Azerbaijanis and the Hojali tragedy. He said accountability and respect for the rule of law are essential for lasting peace. Kurlakovala ended his letter by calling on Taleb to reconsider his position and examine Vardanyan's activities more closely.
All right, it's been a pleasure bringing you the news. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to A News.